Hello YouTube, and welcome to my second video on this big bed that I'm making. This platform bed. So this is the headboard section, and if you look at the design goals that I showed in the first part, the biggest ones for this is that, again, it's one of the main pieces, so I don't want the headboard itself to break down at all. I want it to be one big piece that does not break down, but it also has to fit through hallways and doorways and be light enough to carry. So you'll see a little bit of me trying to make it lighter. Still ends up pretty kind of heavy. And again, I'm using almost 100% scrap wood. I did buy the pine trim, and then you'll see the electrical amenities that I put into it, and I'm also doing some laminating. So that's where we're gonna start with. So let's get into me making this bed. First of all, I did not do any type of design like I did with the main platform. I just thought it up in my head, did not draw it out, and I just started putting it together. And here, this is the frame. And again, I'm using scrap plywood. That's cabinet. It's a construction grade plywood. But what I did was I made 3, I guess, C-beams, and instead of laminating 2 pieces together, I made a C-beam just to make it a little bit lighter. And then here, this is the back that I'm putting on. And this is 1/2-inch plywood. That's the plywood is construction grade. So I'm just trying to make it light. So instead of a full sheet, I'm doing 3 sections. And trying to make the back as square. I'm using the plywood on the back to make it square. As square as I can. To hopefully make the front a little easier to put together. And then this one's not all the way to the bottom, just so that it clears the foot or the trim board on the wall. And then it can't go up too high. It has to be a certain thickness so that it also doesn't interfere with the outlet that's on the wall. So I'm just stapling these on with wood glue, and they're all plywood. Everything here so far is plywood. And this is the bottom that attaches to the bed. So you don't see this bottom part. But I needed it for the thickness and something to attach to. So again, staples and glue, and getting it as square as possible. And then because I wanted to lighten it up, and it's 3/4-inch plywood, this one is, so I cut out 2 big sections, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm laying out the cutout, and then you're not going to ever see because it's hidden, so I just freehand the cut. Doesn't have to be pretty. It's just, this is all stability right now. So now these boards here, my wife bought them a while ago to make a backdrop for camera for taking pictures. And you can tell right here that they are not long enough. They're needed to be like 61 inches, and they came out, they were 60 inches. So we made them work because we wanted to use them up, and we didn't want it. My wife didn't want to use them for her backdrop anymore. She wanted to use them for this. So I made them work without buying more wood. And I am gluing them to the frame, but I'm not gluing them to each other. So who knows if that's bad or not. At least I don't know. But they're shiplap boards, so they fit together. Tongue and groove. And she likes the pattern that it has on it. So here I am finishing up with those pieces, and then you can see the top is not exactly even, just because of the way the wood is. They're not that straight, but it didn't matter because I'm trimming it out. So now I'm going to lift it up. So before, my wife wants two-tone stain. So this is going to be stained first. So I'm going to sand it out. I'm not going to sand it super smooth, just sort of kind of smooth. And then my wife here, she is putting this gray stain on it. What's important about it is that she likes it. So there she is. She stained the whole board. And now that that's stained, I'm gonna trim it out. And the way I did the trim was I didn't want to buy these big huge pieces of pine for these edges. So I bought a nicer pine plywood, sanded pine plywood, and use that for the bigger sections, most importantly the edges. And then here, this part, I'm messing with my miter saw because I've never adjusted it to be square, and I don't know why I never did, but I never did. And I guess I never thought that I could. And I saw some YouTube videos of guys adjusting it, and so I said, hey, maybe I should. So here I just show you all my frustration, and I eventually got it to be perfect, or at least perfect enough for, as far as I can tell. I mean, it's probably not dead perfect, but afterwards it sure made everything easier to miter corners. So I cut these, and because they're the two-tone part, it's easier to stain them first. And here you see I'm covering up the plywood that's going to be stained on the side. But I put these down. They're also routed, rounded corners and mitered all over already. And then for the top, I used the plywood because I didn't want to pay for a big board, but I just took the nicer pine boards and I cut them. I ripped them real thin and then glued and wrapped them around this top board, and then sanded the heck out of it. And then routed the corners to a real, a 3/8 fillet. Maybe it wasn't 3/8. Maybe it was more like a quarter. I think it was a quarter fillet. Anyways, lots of sanding. Try to get this as even as possible. And then I glued it on and nailed it. And so now I'm going to stain those other parts the same color as the darker stain. You'll see us do it right now. So there it is, stained. I was a little worried that it wouldn't stain the same, but it did. So I'm glad. It saved a lot of money using that and using the plywood instead of using solid pine. And then I polyurethane the whole thing. So I just put 2 coats of that polyurethane that I just showed over everything. And I didn't sand it afterwards, so it's still a little rough, but you know, that's what we're kind of a rustic-ish look. That's what we're going for. So it fell while I bumped it. It fell. And putting the thing back on isn't a problem. Fixing that. Fixing that is a problem. Oh, what to do? I gotta figure it out. So I decided to ignore my drop problem with the top of the headboard and move on with the electrical. And it actually turned out pretty good because I needed to, without having that top piece on, it helped me install these. So this is an LED light that attaches to a wall, and I want to hide the plug, so I'm removing the core, I'm removing the core from the inside, and I have to solder or unsolder some parts. So I unsolder the wires, and then I remove them out of that housing, and then later on I put them back in and resolder them. Here I'm just mounting, that's the bracket for the lights. So I mount them the way that they wanted, the way that the instructions tell me to mount them. And then I'm going to drill a hole for the cord to come through the headboard. And again, without the top of the board, the top of the headboard there, it was easy to do this. So now I just have to solder it back together. So I get out my soldering stuff. And then just reassemble everything. Heat shrink tape. And then this is me soldering it together. And it had, the electronics came in this little box that was inside there, so I took it off. And now here I'm heat shrinking, keep stuff from touching. So that's the transformer. It takes it from 120 volts to 12 volts. Putting it all back together. And then, that now I mounted it to the wall and turn it on and seal. Now you can see that there's no cord. So the cords are in the back, obviously, and the headboard's hollow. So I route this one through, and then I'm using these little clips to cable management. And then this is 5-minute epoxy that I attach to that's the plug, and to that, so that hopefully it doesn't move. Anyways, I'm using wire and those little hooks to attach the plug, and this way I can have everything plugged into the back, and then I have just one cord that goes into the wall outlet. That's kind of what my idea is here. So you don't see any of this, obviously it's all hidden. And those two wires hanging are for the two lights. So now I come back to the top of the board, and actually I installed the headboard just to get it out of the room so it doesn't fall again. But this part I left till later, so I essentially just decided to trim it off and then put the router fillet on the corners and just redo all that. That's what I'm doing here. And I sand the heck out of it, which I didn't show, and then I'm restaining it. And then after this, I put another coat of polyurethane, or 2 coats of polyurethane on top of everything. And now that I think about it, I probably should have attached it from the underside. I don't know why I did it from the top, because now I have these I have the screw holes. But first I nailed it and then I screwed it. And I use finished screws, so they're not big. They're thin and they're smaller heads. But I'm going to have to do something. Anyways, there's the headboard with the lights that are attached. They're like little LED reading lights. Thanks for watching.